I think it's important we take a moment, a few minutes to really delve into this. This was a very historic event that affected many of us. We had the FBI agents here in our building, and it went on to all sorts of charges, and actually a few folks going to prison over it. It was a very tough time for all of us. There's a recent book that I really encourage you to read. It's called Not Guilty by Rob Carey. Subtitle is The Unlawful Prosecution of U.S. Senator Ted Stevens. Really encourage you to read it. It's quite an interesting book. Rob Carey, along with Brendan Sullivan, were the attorneys who represented Senator Stevens at his trial. And of course, I knew Ted just like you did, just like many of us did in this room today. We saw him when he was at the height of his power, when he was disgraced and lost his election, and many of us attended his funeral. The key idea of the book is, as a senator before me has explained, if one of the most powerful men in America can be brought down by concealed evidence, by prosecutorial misconduct, then who among us is safe? It's a very good question. Everything in the trial hinged on the testimony of the prosecution's star witness, Bill Allen. He was testifying against Ted Stevens in exchange for his own freedom and for not only for himself but also his children, and for the opportunity to sell his company Vico for hundreds of millions of dollars. So based on Allen's testimony, federal prosecutors charged Ted Stevens with making false statements on a U.S. Senate disclosure form. This was about 100 days before Ted's reelection for his 8th term. He asked for a speedy trial, as the senator said. He wanted to clear his name. The lead lawyer against Senator Stevens, in her opening statement, said, "This trial is about concealment." She said Senator Stevens concealed that he had not paid full value for renovations of his cabin at Girdwood. In fact, Mr. President, he paid more than $160,000 for these renovations, and an independent appraiser valued the cabin at less than $125,000 at the time. But in the end, the government prosecutors relied heavily on Allen's testimony, convinced a Washington, D.C. jury that Stevens was guilty. And this, Mr. President, was just 8 days before the general election here in Alaska. Ted lost that by a thin margin. But before the actual conviction and sentencing by the judge, the case, as the senator before me said, was dismissed by the Justice Department. So it was a case, and clearly a case about concealment. But really, it was the federal prosecutors who concealed evidence. The U.S. District Court Judge Emmett Sullivan ordered an independent investigation. He found the prosecution was permeated by systemic concealment, that the matter concealed would have corroborated Senator Stevens' defense, and that it would have damaged the credibility of the star witness, of the key witness. The investigation found that the government violated the Constitution, so the case was dismissed before any sentence was imposed, before a conviction was entered. When Senator Stevens returned to Alaska, he said, "If I had a fair trial in Alaska, I would have been acquitted." Mr. President, actually a fair trial anywhere would have found him acquitted. He did not deserve this vicious treatment which he received after being a World War II hero, serving in Alaska and the country in the United States Senate for more than 4 decades. He lost his election by a little more than 1,000 votes, and many of us, I suspect, in this room still voted for him. He died in a plane crash near Dillingham in 2010. Later, one of the key FBI agents took his own life. One has to wonder why. The story Rob Carey tells in Not Guilty, Mr. President, is like a Greek tragedy by Aristophanes, a great man brought low. At the funeral, Vice President Biden spoke, so did Senator Inouye and many others. Hundreds attended the funeral at the Anchorage Baptist Temple. As I were driving to the funeral, there were sheets off the overpass that said, "We miss you, Ted," and we still do. Please support this resolution.